My name is Marcus Ellison. I'm 44 years old, and for 20 years I have believed one simple thing. If you put in the work, if you show up every single day, life eventually rewards you for it. That belief lasted exactly until 7:14 p.m. on March 15th, 2024. That's the moment I watched my wife of 10 years kiss another man through the window of a restaurant in Buckhead, Atlanta. A kiss that wasn't rushed, wasn't accidental, wasn't a mistake. It was slow. It was practiced. It was the kiss of two people who had done this before. But here's the part that still keeps me up some nights. The part nobody saw coming, including me. A stranger's hand closed around my arm before I could move, before I could even breathe right. And a woman I had never met in my life leaned in close and said 4 words that changed everything. "Sit down, stay calm." She knew my name. She knew the date. She knew about a deposit I'd paid for that table 3 weeks earlier, a number I hadn't told a single living soul. $1,800 I'd been saving from overtime jobs since January, just to make our anniversary special. Before we get into the story, if tonight's video moves you even half as much as Living It moved me, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Stories like this deserve to be heard all the way to the end. Now, let me take you back to where it actually started. Not at the restaurant, earlier than that, to an ordinary Friday that felt like every other Friday in our marriage. It was 6:32 p.m. when the text came through. I was sitting in my truck outside a Lowe's on Memorial Drive, finishing up a job site walkthrough for Ellison Electric, the company I built from nothing starting back in 2009. My phone buzzed against the cup holder. "Stuck at work, big deadline, babe. Happy anniversary. Love you." 2 red hearts at the end. I remember smiling at that message like a man 20 years younger than I was. 10 years married to Keisha Ellison, and I still got that little flutter in my chest seeing her name pop up on my screen. After everything, the long nights building the business, the 2 kids, the mortgage on our house in West End, that flutter was still there. I drove home, showered off the day, and pulled out the suit I'd bought 2 weeks earlier from a consignment shop on Peachtree Road. Charcoal gray, slim cut. The kind of suit a man buys when he wants to remind his wife why she said yes the first time. I stopped at a flower stand near Grant Park and bought a bundle of Stargazer lilies, the same flowers Keisha carried down the aisle 10 years ago at a small Baptist church in Old Fourth Ward. The same flowers she once told me smelled like the first day of the rest of our lives. I almost turned that truck around twice on the way to the restaurant. The first time was on I-20. Somewhere past the Cascade exit, when a strange, cold feeling settled into my stomach for no reason I could name. The second time was in the parking lot itself, engine still running, lilies on the passenger seat. Thinking maybe I should just call my best friend Leroy and tell him I had a bad feeling about tonight. But I'd already paid the deposit. I'd already told myself this was the year we fixed whatever had gone quiet between us these past several months. The late nights. The phone she started keeping face down on the counter. The way she'd stopped finishing her sentences to me. So I turned the engine off. I walked inside, lilies in hand, suit pressed, heart hopeful in a way I hadn't let myself feel in a long time. And that's when I saw her. Keisha was wearing the red dress I bought her for her birthday. Fitted, elegant. The one she said made her feel like the only woman in the room. She was sitting at a table near the window, candlelight catching the gold at her wrist, laughing at something. She wasn't laughing with me. She wasn't even facing the door. She was facing Reggie Thornton, a man I recognized instantly because his name was on half the construction contracts in Atlanta. A CEO with a Rolex the size of a hubcap and a smile built for cameras. And as I stood there, lilies wilting slightly in my grip, Reggie leaned across that table and kissed my wife on the mouth. She didn't pull away. She kissed him back. The restaurant noise around me, the clinking glasses, the soft jazz, the murmur of other people's happy lives, folded into one thin, sharp ringing in my ears, like something inside my chest had snapped clean in half. I don't remember moving. I just remember my legs carrying me toward that window like they belonged to someone else. And that's when the hand caught my arm. A woman, maybe late 40s, dressed sharp in a navy blazer, gray eyes, steady as still water, didn't even glance at the window. She looked straight at me. "Sit down," she said again, quieter this time. "Stay calm. The real show is about to start. And your wife planned this night months ago." I want you to sit with that for a second, the way I had to. Because in the next 60 seconds, I was going to learn that everything I thought I knew about my marriage, and about myself, was about to come apart at the seams. What I heard next would destroy everything I believed in. Tamara Ellis didn't tell me her name right away. First, she steered me to a quiet corner of the bar, away from the window, away from Keisha's sightline, and ordered me a glass of water I never touched. "Let me be clear about one thing first," she said. "Your wife didn't plan for you to walk in here tonight. That part was bad luck, plain and simple. Yours and hers, both. But everything else, the lawyer, the money, what happens next, that part she's been planning for months." Tamara was a private investigator. 3 weeks earlier, Reggie Thornton's ex-wife had hired her. Not about me, not about Keisha, but about Reggie. Years back, in their divorce settlement, the two of them had agreed to a steep liquidated damages clause. If Reggie was ever caught in another public affair, he'd owe his ex-wife $5 million. Full stop. She'd already filed suit to enforce it, and discovery in that case was active, which meant subpoenas had already gone out for Reggie's financial accounts and his phone records. Tamara's job was to build that case. I was never the target. I was just standing too close to the blast radius. "We've had eyes on his outgoing payments for 3 weeks," she said. "When a deposit showed up on a card tied to your household this week, same week, almost the same dollar amount, it got flagged automatically. That's the only reason I know about tonight at all." She slid a folded bank record across the bar top. $1,800 a month, she said. That's what he's been wiring her. 14 months running. I looked down at numbers I had no business seeing, numbers my mind refused to connect to the woman in the red dress 40 feet away. $1,800 a month. The same amount, almost to the dollar, I'd spent making tonight's special. I felt my jaw tighten, but I didn't say a word. I just listened, because some part of me, the part that had survived 20 years of hard jobs and harder lessons, understood that whatever came next, I needed to hear it clean, without rage clouding the details. "It's not just the money," Tamara continued. 9 months ago, your wife hired a divorce attorney, Cynthia Marsh, downtown. We don't have anything from inside that attorney's office. What we have is texts. Your wife relays the strategy to Reggie, word for word, like she's reporting back to a partner. She paused. One of them reads, and I'm quoting it exactly, "Cynthia says if I can show he's been distant or unstable, primary custody's basically guaranteed. Just keep doing what we're doing." The room tilted. I'd built Ellison Electric out of a single used van and a dream, working 16-hour days so my children would never know the kind of scarcity I grew up with in Old Fourth Ward, raised by my mother Evelyn, alone after my father left when I was 6. I remembered her cracked, steady hands, working 2 jobs to keep food on our table, telling me, "Baby, a man who keeps his word is richer than a man who keeps his pride." I remembered meeting Keisha at a community cookout in Grant Park 11 years ago, her laugh carrying across the whole park, her eyes catching mine over a paper plate of ribs. I remembered our wedding day, her walking toward me holding those same stargazer lilies, both of us crying before either of us said a word. And I remembered the last 2 years differently now. The late nights, Keisha pulling further away, dinner going cold on the stove before I made it through the door. I'd told myself it was a rough patch. I'd told myself we'd get through it the way we got through everything. "There's more," Tamara said, and something in her voice told me to brace myself. 2 months ago, Reggie wired $80,000 into an account opened in your son's name. On paper, it looks like a college fund. It isn't. It traces straight back to him, a single lump sum, nothing else attached to it. Flights, a rental property in Charlotte. It's an exit fund, Marcus, in case this all blows up before she's ready. My hands had started to shake. Not from fear, from something colder, steadier, more dangerous than fear. I thought about my son, Jamal Jr., 8 years old, never far from his baseball glove. I thought about my daughter, Aisha, 5 years old, who couldn't fall asleep without her stuffed rabbit pressed against her cheek. I thought about them waking up tomorrow in a house that might already be halfway packed without my knowledge. "Why are you telling me this?" I finally asked. "None of this is your case. None of this is your problem." Tamara was quiet a moment, like she was deciding how much truth to hand over. "Technically, it isn't," she said. "What I'm showing you isn't strictly mine to share. It's discovery material from someone else's lawsuit, and I could catch real trouble for handing it over like this. But I didn't take this job to protect a man who cheats, and I'm not going to sit on something that could cost a good father his kids just because it's not officially my fight. So I'm telling you because somebody has to, before it's too late for you to use it." I looked back through the window one last time. Keisha was still laughing, still glowing under that candlelight, completely unaware that her entire secret architecture had just been handed to the one person she'd spent 14 months hiding it from. I didn't walk over to that table. I didn't make a scene. Some men would have. God knows I wanted to. Instead, I drove home in silence and sat in the driveway in West End for 10 full minutes before going inside. I checked on the kids first. Jamal asleep with his glove under his arm. Aisha curled around her rabbit. Both of them breathing easy, completely unaware their whole world might already be shifting beneath them. I stood in that hallway a long time, and I made myself a quiet promise that night. The kind my mother used to make when things in our house went wrong and there was no one else to fix them. I am going to find every loose wire in this, and I am going to fix it. Quietly, carefully, the way I was raised to do everything that matters. Before she left the parking lot, Tamara had one more thing for me. "There's an evidence package being finalized," she said. "Photos, hotel receipts, everything. It'll be ready by morning." She paused at her car door, something close to sympathy crossing her face. "But Marcus, what you saw tonight isn't even the worst of it. Your wife is hiding more than an affair. Tomorrow, you're going to understand exactly how much more." I didn't sleep that night. I just sat in the dark kitchen of my own home, turning that promise over and over in my mind, waiting for the sun to come up and bring the rest of the truth with it. 9 months before that anniversary dinner, long before Marcus ever suspected a thing, Keisha had already hired a divorce lawyer and started quietly building a custody case against him. Not after she got caught, before. While he was still planning anniversary surprises and buying flowers from the same stand she loved on their wedding day. Some of you will call that cold-blooded premeditation, a betrayal that started in a lawyer's office, not in a hotel room. Others will say a woman who felt trapped or unhappy for years has every right to quietly protect herself before walking away, even if the timing looks ugly from the outside. So tell us where you stand. Was Keisha simply a woman protecting her future? Or did the 9 months of secret planning make her betrayal worse than the affair itself? Drop your verdict in the comments. We're reading every single one. The promise I'd made standing in that dark hallway followed me straight into morning. At 9:14, a courier Tamara had hired personally, so nothing would trace back to her business, dropped an envelope on my doorstep. I sat alone at my kitchen table in West End and opened it before either of my children woke up. Photographs. A dozen of them, time-stamped across 14 months. Keisha and Reggie outside the Intercontinental in Buckhead. Keisha and Reggie at a rooftop bar downtown. Keisha and Reggie in a parking garage, his hand at the small of her back, like he had every right to be there. Receipts. Room charges, room service. A spa visit billed to a corporate card with Reggie's company name printed clean across the top. And then, near the bottom of the stack, something I wasn't prepared for. A string of recovered text messages pulled legally as part of the discovery process in the Morality Clause lawsuit. I won't repeat all of it word for word. Some of it doesn't deserve to be. But the meaning was unmistakable. Keisha and Reggie had discussed, in plain language, a strategy to make me look unstable. Frustrate me, isolate me from support, push hard enough, often enough, that a custody evaluator might believe I'd snapped, even floating in passing the idea that Keisha could one day claim I'd turned aggressive with her if things didn't move fast enough on their timeline. I sat with that for a long time, long enough that the coffee I'd poured went cold beside me. Here's what I didn't understand yet, sitting at that table, but came to understand later, after months of therapy and a lot of long, honest talks with my mother. People rarely plan cruelty in cold blood from day one. They plan protection. In Keisha's mind, I don't believe she was plotting against a good man. She was rehearsing a defense against the kind of confrontation she was terrified of facing honestly. Someone who feels trapped in a marriage they're ashamed to leave will sometimes build an escape route out of evidence instead of conversation, because evidence feels safer than vulnerability. It doesn't excuse what she did, but it explains it. Fear dressed up as strategy. The tragedy is, the very planning meant to protect her from confrontation became the thing that made the confrontation so much worse. I thought about every time I'd held my temper this past year. Every time I'd told myself, don't raise your voice, Marcus, not in front of the kids, not ever. I thought about how careful I had always been. How my mother raised me to be careful, because the world doesn't always give a black man room to make mistakes the way it gives other men room. I had spent my whole life building a reputation as steady, as calm, as a man who keeps his word. And somewhere in a hotel suite in Buckhead, two people had been quietly drafting a version of me that didn't exist, just in case they needed it. I called Tamara. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "Will this hold up?" I asked. "In court, not just here in my kitchen?" "It will," she said. "Chain of custody's clean. Everything's time-stamped, and my attorney's already coordinating with yours on how it gets entered. But Marcus, there's one more thing in there you haven't gotten to yet. Page 9. Page 9 wasn't about me at all. It was about Reggie. Buried in the financial records were wire transfers tied to an offshore account, evidence he'd been hiding investment income from his own company's board, money that should have been disclosed to shareholders under Georgia law. Keisha wasn't just an affair partner. She'd let him route some of that money through an account in her name, money a family court would eventually have to untangle as part of deciding what had honestly been earned in this marriage and what hadn't. I drove to the office that afternoon, told my crew I needed the day, and came home before the kids got off the bus. Keisha walked in around 6, still in her work clothes, still wearing the perfume I'd bought her for Christmas, completely unaware the floor beneath her had already shifted. "Hey, baby," she said, setting her purse down like it was any other Tuesday. "Sorry I missed your texts. Crazy day." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam anything. I set the envelope down between us and said, "Sit down." Something flickered behind her eyes. Recognition, maybe, or fear. Her hands were already trembling before she pulled the photos out. I watched the color drain from her face, page by page, like water from a cracked glass. "Marcus, I can explain." "You don't have to," I said, my voice flat and even. "I already know about the $1,800 a month. I already know about Cynthia Marsh and the custody filing. I already know about the $80,000 in our son's name." I paused, letting that land. "And I know what you and Reggie talked about doing to make me look unstable in front of a judge." She started crying then. Not the performance kind, but something that looked, for the first time in a long time, genuinely human. She sank into her chair and put her face in her hands. "I never wanted it to go this far," she said. "It started slow. He made me feel like I mattered again. Like I wasn't just somebody's wife and somebody's mother. And then it was too late to stop, and I panicked, and you decided the way out was to take my children and tell the world I was the dangerous one," I said, still calm, still even. 14 months, Keisha. 10 years of marriage, and you spent more than a year planning how to erase me. She didn't deny it. She just kept crying, smaller now, smaller than I'd ever seen her. I get asked this constantly. "Marcus, how did you stay so calm?" The truth is, my calm wasn't some saintly virtue. It was armor I'd been building since I was 6 years old, watching my mother hold an entire household together on nothing but grit and 2 minimum-wage jobs. I learned early that a black man's anger, even justified anger, gets read differently than other men's. So I trained myself, year by year, to turn pain into stillness instead of noise. That night in the kitchen, my calm wasn't the absence of rage. It was rage with nowhere safe to go, channeled instead into precision. Because precision, unlike anger, can't be used against you in a courtroom. I didn't break a single dish. I simply turned and walked upstairs to look in on my children, leaving Keisha alone with the wreckage of 14 months spread across the table behind me. The silence felt heavier than any shouting match could have. Later that night, sitting on the top step with my phone in hand, I called Leroy. He didn't ask many questions. He just listened, the way he always had, ever since the two of us were hauling wire spools out of that first beat-up van back in 2009. When I finally got the words out, he was quiet a moment, then said, "You did the hard part already, man. You stayed calm. Now you let the truth do the rest of the work." Keisha had always said her sister Renee knew her better than anyone alive. Better, some nights, than I did. Sitting on those stairs, phone still warm in my hand, I found myself wondering, for the first time, exactly what that meant. 4 months passed between that night in the kitchen and the morning I finally sat in a courtroom. My attorney moved fast once Tamara's evidence was authenticated. Financial misconduct stacked on top of an attempted custody manipulation scheme tends to get a judge's attention, and our case landed on an expedited docket. Still, 4 months of motions, depositions, and waiting is its own kind of exhausting, especially with 2 kids who kept asking when things would feel normal again. I made a decision early on that those 4 months wouldn't show on my children's faces if I could help it. Jamal was 8, old enough to sense tension even when nobody said a word, so I told him the truth in the smallest pieces he could carry. That Mom and I were going to live in different houses now, that it wasn't his fault, that he could ask me anything and I'd answer honest. Aisha was 5, too young for explanations, old enough for routine. So routine is what I gave her. Pancakes every Saturday morning, same blue plate. Bath at 7, 2 books, lights out by 8. Some nights I sat in my truck in the driveway for 10 extra minutes before going inside, just to put my face together first. They never saw that part. They didn't need to. 2 weeks before the trial date, my attorney got a call neither of us expected. Renee, Keisha's sister, wanted to talk. She wouldn't say why over the phone. She just said it couldn't wait. The courtroom on Pryor Street in downtown Atlanta doesn't look like much from the outside. Gray stone, tired elevators, the kind of building you walk into hoping you'll never have to walk into again. I sat at the petitioner's table in a suit I'd bought specifically for this. My lawyer beside me, Tamara's evidence package now formally entered into the court record. Keisha sat across the room beside Cynthia Marsh. Keisha wouldn't look at me. Not once. Her strategy shifted fast once the affair came out. She and her legal team pivoted to a counterclaim, alleging I'd been emotionally volatile at home, citing late nights at work, citing moments of withdrawal, trying to spin the version of me she and Reggie had quietly sketched out in those old messages into something a judge might actually believe. It almost worked. Almost. Because the strategy Tamara's evidence had only hinted at in writing was about to be spoken out loud in open court. And this time, someone had been asked to help make it real. Renee was called to testify. I hadn't expected to see her there at all, not after everything. But I remembered the call my attorney had taken 2 weeks earlier, and some part of me had been bracing for this moment ever since. She and Keisha had always been close, the kind of sisters who finish each other's sentences at family dinners. I assumed if anyone in that family would stand behind Keisha no matter what, it would be her. I was wrong. Renee told the court that 3 weeks before the trial date, Keisha had called her, crying, asking for a favor. A written statement claiming she'd witnessed me lose my temper with the children. Something that had never happened, not once, not in 8 years of Jamal's life or 5 of Aisha's. Renee refused. That refusal was what finally pushed her to call my attorney herself, not out of loyalty to me, she made clear, but because she couldn't sit by and let her sister do this to 2 children she loved. She told me, Renee said, voice shaking, that Marcus was, and I'm quoting her, just a tool to get the kids and the stability I needed. That once she had what she wanted, the marriage was never going to last anyway. Cynthia Marsh tried hard to undo the damage on cross-examination, accusing Renee of bitterness over an old family dispute, suggesting she'd invented the whole exchange out of jealousy. Renee held her ground, eyes filling but voice steady. I love my sister, she said. That's exactly why I couldn't sit here and let her do this. Judge Patricia Houghton, who'd clearly seen every kind of courtroom theater Atlanta had to offer, simply made a note and moved on. Sometimes the truth doesn't need defending. It just needs room to stand on its own. 2 things were happening in that courtroom at once, and it took me a long time afterward to untangle them. The first was Renee's. Loyalty between sisters is one of the strongest bonds people carry. But loyalty has a breaking point, and that point usually isn't crossed by the original sin. It's crossed by what someone is asked to do to cover for it. Renee could forgive an affair. She couldn't forge a lie that would take 2 children away from a father who'd done nothing wrong. That's the line conscience draws, even inside unconditional love. The second was Keisha's, revealed in one devastating phrase: just a tool. Calling someone a tool isn't cruelty by accident. It's how a person justifies using them. If I was never fully a partner in her mind, only a stable means to an end, then betraying me didn't have to feel like betrayal to her. It felt like resourcefulness. That's often the quiet, ugly engine behind long-term deception. Not hatred for the person being deceived, but the slow erosion of seeing them as a person at all. Keisha broke down at the defense table. Not strategic tears this time, real ones. The kind that come when every door you've quietly built behind yourself finally slams shut at once. The judge took 11 days to issue her ruling. 11 days of going to work every morning and coming home every night, trying not to let my children see me check my phone every 20 minutes. Leroy covered 2 job sites for me that week without being asked. My mother started sleeping over again, the way she had right after the filing first went public, just so somebody steady was always in the house. When my attorney finally called, I was halfway up a ladder in a customer's backyard in East Atlanta, and I had to climb back down before my hands were steady enough to answer. When it came, it was thorough, and it was decisive. Primary physical custody of Jamal Jr. and Aisha was awarded to me, with supervised, limited visitation for Keisha, pending a full psychological and financial review. The court ordered the $80,000 account returned in full to our children's actual education trust under independent oversight. Keisha was held responsible for a significant share of the marital assets being redirected toward the children's care, given the documented evidence of premeditated deception. And Reggie's troubles were only beginning. The financial misconduct uncovered in Tamara's investigation triggered a formal inquiry from his own board of directors. Within 6 weeks, news broke across Atlanta's business circles. Contracts he'd spent 20 years building evaporated almost overnight. Partners who once shook his hand at galas wouldn't return his calls. The same community that had once celebrated him as one of the city's most powerful black executives now spoke his name with a different kind of weight behind it. I won. I want to be honest about that, because the version of this story where I simply forgave everything and moved on quietly wouldn't be true. I fought, and I won, and there was a part of me that felt something like justice settle into my chest the day that ruling came down. But I want to be just as honest about the other part. What I felt driving home that day didn't have a clean name. There's a term for it: ambiguous loss. Grieving someone who's still alive, still breathing, still technically reachable, but who exists now only as a memory of who you believed they were. Winning in court didn't undo 10 years of believing I knew my own wife. Vindication and grief aren't opposites. They can sit in the same chest at the same time, and neither one cancels the other out. I drove from that courthouse alone, windows down on I-20, and somewhere around the Cascade exit, the same spot where that cold feeling had first crept into my stomach the night of the anniversary dinner, I had to pull over. I sat on the shoulder of that highway and let myself cry, hard, for the marriage I thought I had, the one that had existed mostly in my own hopeful imagination these last 2 years. I cried for the woman who'd held those same lilies on our wedding day. That woman, I understood now, had been gone a long time before I ever saw her kiss another man through a restaurant window. I let the sun go down over the skyline before I wiped my face and drove home to my children, the only 2 people in this whole story who had done absolutely nothing wrong. I thought, sitting in that driveway, that the hardest part was finally behind me. I had no idea how wrong I was about that. The months that followed taught me something grief never could on its own: that rebuilding happens slowly, and then almost without you noticing. Ellison Electric grew faster than I expected. Word got around about a man who'd weathered something hard and kept showing up to work every day with the same steady hands. New contracts came in. I hired 4 more guys, including Leroy, who'd been with me since the early days, hauling wire spools out of that first used van back in 2009. My mother, Evelyn, moved in with us that August, officially to help with the kids, though we both knew it was as much about keeping an eye on me. She'd sit on the porch in the evenings, in a rocking chair that had been creaking since what felt like the Eisenhower administration, sipping sweet tea, telling Jamal and Aisha stories about growing up in Old Fourth Ward. "Your daddy," she told Jamal one evening, "learned a long time ago that patience isn't weakness. It's how you find the wrong wire in something before it burns the whole house down." Jamal didn't fully understand her yet. I did. I understood it in my bones. One evening that same month, he looked up from his homework and asked the kind of question only an 8-year-old can ask without flinching. "Daddy, do you still love Mom?" I thought about lying to make it simple. I thought about my own father, who left when I was 6 and never explained anything to me at all. So I knelt to Jamal's eye level instead. "I think I'll always care what happens to your mother," I told him, "because she gave me you and your sister. But loving someone the right way means telling the truth, even when it's hard. That's what I'm trying to teach you both, even when it costs me something." He nodded slowly, the way kids do when they're filing something away to understand later, and went back to his math homework like nothing had happened at all. The court-ordered visits started that same month, supervised at a family services center off Memorial Drive, a beige building with soft chairs and a box of toys nobody quite knew how to play with anymore. I waited in the parking lot the first few times, not because I had to, but because some part of me needed to see my children walk out the same way they'd walked in. Keisha looked smaller in that building than I'd ever seen her. No red dress, no gold at her wrist, just a woman signing a logbook under a supervisor's watch to spend 90 minutes with the children she used to tuck in every night. We didn't speak those first few visits. There wasn't anything left to negotiate between us, only logistics, handled through a coordinator with a clipboard. It was its own kind of ending, quieter than the courtroom, but somehow more final. We had a picnic that October out at Piedmont Park. Me, Evelyn, Leroy and his wife, the kids. Jamal flew a kite with a neighbor boy he'd just met, the two of them running until they were breathless. Aisha waded ankle-deep in the splash fountain, shrieking every time the water came up unexpectedly. Evelyn spilled iced tea straight onto a recipe card she'd brought for the church potluck the next day, muttering about this old memory of mine, while Jamal laughed so hard he nearly choked on his sandwich. It was, for the first time in longer than I could remember, an uncomplicated kind of happy. By the time I finally got around to clearing out the last boxes in the garage that December, things from the old house neither of us had touched since the divorce was finalized, I found a journal tucked beneath a stack of old photo albums. Keisha's handwriting, dated nearly 12 years back, well before our wedding. I shouldn't have read it. I told myself that even as I kept turning the pages. In it, she'd written about a man named Curtis, someone from her past, someone she'd loved before me and never quite stopped thinking about, even as she walked down that aisle in Old Fourth Ward holding stargazer lilies. She'd written that she chose me because I was steady and safe, because she wanted children with a man who would never leave the way her own father had left her mother. And she'd written, in words that still ache a little to read, that she loved me in her own way, but never the way she'd once loved him. I sat on that garage floor a long time. Reading it changed something for me. I finally understood why Reggie Thornton's attention had landed the way it did. It wasn't really about Reggie at all. It was about an old, unfinished ache she'd carried into our marriage and never once dealt with honestly. An ache that left a door open inside her that the right kind of attention could eventually walk through. That didn't make what she did to me acceptable, but it made it make sense. People rarely destroy what they have because of who's standing in front of them. They destroy it because of a wound that was already there, waiting for someone to find the crack. I won't tell you I forgave her completely, because that wouldn't be honest. But I felt something settle in my chest that afternoon that hadn't been there before. Not new tears this time, just a long, slow exhale, like I'd finally set down something heavy I didn't know I was still carrying. I closed the box and went inside to make sure Jamal had finished his homework and Aisha had brushed her teeth. Healing doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in pieces, the way morning light comes through a kitchen window. Slow, gradual, easy to miss if you're not paying attention. I was paying attention now. The house felt steady again. The wiring, finally, felt fixed. But fixed wiring, as any electrician will tell you, doesn't mean the house is finished. It just means it's safe enough to keep building on. Building on it is exactly what I'd been doing, right up until the night that proved I wasn't quite finished after all. March 15th came around again. 1 full year, almost to the day, since the night that changed everything. No restaurant reservations this time. No consignment shop suit. No stargazer lilies. Just me, Jamal, and Aisha, back at Grant Park, the same park where I'd first met Keisha at a community cookout more than a decade earlier. Full circle in its own strange way. We played baseball until the sun dipped low and orange behind the trees. Jamal had gotten good, really good. His pitching arm stronger than it had any business being at 9 years old. Aisha, 6 now, had traded the stuffed rabbit for a bicycle with streamers on the handlebars, though I noticed she still kept that rabbit tucked in her backpack, just in case. We grabbed dinner on the way home. Simple. Easy. The kind of quiet, ordinary happiness I used to think I'd lost for good. I got the kids down by 9 and headed downstairs to lock up for the night. My phone rang at 11:47 p.m. Tamara. I almost let it go to voicemail. The case was closed. The ruling was final. There shouldn't have been anything left to discuss. But something in my gut told me to pick up. Marcus. Her voice was tighter than I'd ever heard it. I need you to listen to me carefully. I sat down at the kitchen table. It's not over, she said. Keisha and Reggie never actually stopped working together. I picked up financial activity 2 weeks ago that didn't make sense, so I kept digging quietly, off the books, because something felt wrong. They're building a case to reopen custody, and they're not doing it clean this time. My stomach went cold. What does that mean? It means they've manufactured evidence, she said. Something serious. Something aimed directly at you. And it involves the kids being used as part of the strategy. I don't have all of it yet. But what I do have tells me this isn't a bluff. They're planning to file within the month. Rain had started outside, tapping soft and steady against the window over the sink. The kind of Atlanta rain that comes quiet and doesn't let up for hours. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, the same sound I remembered from that restaurant window over a year earlier. Marcus, Tamara said, quieter now. This isn't over. They're coming for the kids. And they have something I didn't see coming. My mind went straight to the $80,000 from a year ago, to how carefully they'd planned that first time, months in advance, while I had no idea anything was wrong. If this new evidence was built with that same patience, I understood exactly how dangerous it could be. People who plan quietly for months don't make careless mistakes. I didn't say much. I just listened to the rain and made myself a short list in my head. Call my attorney first thing in the morning. Ask Tamara to start documenting everything the moment she had it. Say nothing to the kids until I knew exactly what we were facing. The same discipline that had carried me through the worst night of my life was already starting to carry me through this one. I thought about my mother's voice from that August evening on the porch. Patience isn't weakness. It's how you find the wrong wire before it burns the whole house down. Sitting there in the dark, I understood something I hadn't let myself admit until that moment. I hadn't found all the wires yet. Not even close. I went upstairs and stood in my children's doorway, listening to them breathe, steady and unaware. Safe for tonight at least. Then I sat down on the hallway floor between their 2 rooms, back against the wall, and stayed there a long while, thinking, planning, refusing to let fear get ahead of me the way it almost had outside that restaurant a year before. Whatever Keisha and Reggie were building, I would meet it the same way I'd met everything else in my life. Quietly, carefully, and completely prepared. This story reminds us that patience isn't something you simply decide to have. It's something you practice, on purpose, like anything else worth keeping. If a relationship in your own life starts to feel like a closed door, don't just sit with the worry. Buy a $5 spiral notebook from Walgreens and once a week write down one specific thing that felt off, with the date beside it. Not to accuse anyone, but so your own memory has something solid to stand on later. And if you already carry a quiet grief of your own, call one grandchild this Sunday and teach them a single recipe from your mother's kitchen. By hand, no mixer. That's how loyalty and clear-eyed patience actually get passed down, not in a speech, but in a notebook, a phone call, and a rolling pin. If you want to find out what Keisha and Reggie are really planning, and what Marcus discovers about the people he once trusted most, stay close. Part 2 is coming, and it changes everything. These scripts are born from genuine human creativity and a desire to confront social truths. AI acted as a co-pilot, helping organize thoughts so that powerful messages of fairness, forgiveness, and human potential could touch hearts worldwide. Production team: Story and Screenplay by Quinn Fung. Character Development and Visual Conceptualization by Chris Nguyen. Video Scripting and Scene Adaptation by David Nguyen. A passionate team dedicated to bringing this story to life.